Okay, well, folks, good morning. It's 2 minutes after 10. Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to spend a few minutes just kind of reviewing your new Youth at Work grant that all of you have received. There are going to be 4 of us presenting today. My name is John Olson. I'm one of the youth program coordinators here at DEED. I'm joined in the room right now with my colleagues Corey Schmid, who is a program specialist here at DEED, as well as Lynn Dalma, who is a program coordinator here with DEED as well. And we're also joined by our intern Judith today, who is an urban scholar working with us this summer, so we're glad to have her along. Our Deputy Commissioner, Hamza Warfa, will be joining us shortly. He is otherwise tied up. So before we get going, I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the housekeeping with today's webinar. All of you are being muted as you come into the room. If for some reason you would unmute your phone, but please keep it muted. Otherwise, everybody hears the background noise. We are recording this, so after today's webinar, it'll take a little bit of time for WebEx to process it, and then we'll get it up on the website, and Corey will send you an email with the specific location of the recording of today's webinar as well. Questions, you can do a couple of different things. You can either email Corey directly with questions, or if you have something that comes to mind, please type it into the chat window and send it to myself. What we will do is what we did with the RFP. We will collect those questions and we will put answers together, and we will be sure to get them out to everybody, to the greatest extent possible. We are processing grants at this point. We know a fair amount of things. There are pieces of this, though, that are still up in the air. So with that, our Deputy Commissioner has not joined us yet, so we'll just come back to him when he does arrive. Again, questions regarding or anything relating to your Youth at Work grant, type it in the chat window and or email to Corey Schmid. You see his email address on your presentation. Corey will also be sending out a brief survey after today's webinar to see if you have any additional questions as you're going along. Financial expectations, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague Lynn Dalma. Lynn.
Thank you, John. As John said, my name is Lynn Dalma. I'm a program coordinator here on the youth team at DEED, and I'll be supporting Corey and the team on the Youth at Work project. Right now, I'm involved primarily in setting up the contracts for this project. So we understand that since you don't have your contract documents yet, we're going to just go pretty high level on some of the financial expectations at this point, just to give you an introduction. And when you receive the documents, there will be some follow-up technical assistance that will be provided as we move along, so that you can ask specific questions about the documents that you have for this grant. But just right now, we're going to go over a little bit of the high-level financial expectations, starting off with the general cost guidance. And this is pretty standard for all DEED grants. So costs for the grant have to have a few things apply to them. They have to be appropriately allocated. So if you have a cost that's shared amongst programs like rent or something like that, you need to appropriately allocate those costs across programs and grant funding sources. One grant can't bear the full cost of rent, for example. You need to consistently apply your costs when you're sharing those costs. You need to consistently apply them month to month. You can't charge a lot of rent in one month and very little in the next month, for example. So you have to have a kind of a plan in place for how you're going to charge those costs. The costs must be necessary for operation of the grant. They must be reasonable. And again, allocable, that kind of ties into the first one, where, you know, you need to be able to distribute costs amongst funding sources when appropriate. And they have to, this is important, they have to be incurred during the time period of the grant. So your grant contract will have a start and end date, and any costs that you're charging against this grant must be incurred during that time period. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about the Youth at Work cost categories that we're using. The administration cost category, DEED has set a policy based on Minnesota statute that for this grant, no more than 10% of the grant amount may be expended on administrative costs. Keep in mind that if for some reason you do not fully expend the grant, the admin costs are limited to 10% of your actual expenditures, not the initial award amount. So you may have to adjust things as your grant goes if you're not going to spend the full amount of the grant. Administrative costs are those things that are associated with more general operation of your organization and not the direct provision of program services to participants. There's definitions in our federal Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act rules that DEED follows. And we have listed here some examples of costs that would be classified as administrative costs. Accounting functions, cash management functions, those kinds of things. Procurement and purchasing functions, management of your property, personnel management, payroll functions, audit functions for your organization, incident report response functions. I think that would be like investigation of workers' comp, things, those kinds of things. General legal service functions, purchase of goods and services that are related to carrying out the administrative functions. Those are all administrative costs. Systems and procedures that are required to carry out the administrative functions, along with monitoring and oversight you may incur, like for if you're subcontracting or have a vendor for something, any monitoring and oversight of that would be administrative costs. And then travel costs that are related to carrying out the administrative function. This is not an all-inclusive list, but it gives a pretty wide range of the kinds of costs that we would consider administrative costs. If you have specific questions, you know, you can direct those to us as we go along.
Just to kind of tie in with what Lynn has already told you, the question may come to mind, well, this is a state-funded grant, so why are you following federal? The reason that we do that here is that at DEED we have a significant number of grantees that are working with a mixture of state and federal funding. And many, many years ago, previous leadership decided in conjunction with a meeting and with grantees that it was much easier to try and operate under one set of administrative rules versus trying to operate under two different sets of administrative cost guidelines. So the decision was made at that time, and again, this is many, many years ago, to just follow the federal guidelines and the state parallels with that. So I just wanted to add that in for clarity.
Thank you, John. So the language that we have in the PowerPoint is very similar to the language that was in the RFP. It was, I essentially took it out of there, so more detailed information. You know, we can provide at a later point, but right now we're covering this higher level information. So the other, the second cost category we have on the Youth at Work budget was youth participant wage and fringe. So those would be wage and fringe benefits that you're paying directly to youth while they're engaged in program activities. For example, if they're doing a work experience or something like that where they're getting paid a wage while they are working in that activity. And the fringe benefits we're referring to here typically would include workers' compensation, Medicare, and Social Security and FICA coverage as appropriate. The direct services to youth is pretty broad category. In many cases, it's usually the largest budget category for our youth programs. It includes any costs that are associated with providing direct services to participants, except for the cost of the youth participant wage and fringe, which we have in that separate cost category I just mentioned. So this would include your staff costs, wage and fringe for your staff who are providing direct services to youth participants, like case managers or individuals who are doing training, workshops, or things like that. Those staff costs for the time they're spent working on this grant with the youth can be charged to the direct service to youth category. And then some of the things that they would be potentially doing would be this, like case management for your participants, conducting assessments, or the cost, if you're doing an assessment that has a cost involved with it, the cost of the assessment would be charged to direct service to youth. Staff time spent developing an individual employment plan or individual service strategy for a participant, counseling, career planning, those kinds of activities where you're actually working directly with the youth or on behalf of the youth is considered a direct service. In terms of the wage and fringe for staff, I should also add that if you are spending time setting up a work site for a work experience for a youth, for example, you're negotiating with a potential work site host, you know, how this is going to work, time you spent developing those work sites, or the training materials that you're providing to the youth, those things are considered direct service as well. The support services category is intended to capture those items that are necessary for a youth to participate in the program to facilitate their participation. So like things like transportation, bus passes, or in some cases on a limited basis, like a gas card for a youth who needs gas in the car to be able to get to the program activities. Clothing, you know, for a work experience, or if the youth doesn't have appropriate clothing to participate in a program activity. If they need any sort of tools for a work experience, if they need some sort of child care assistance, funds for them to be able to participate in the program, school-related expenses, like if they're doing a training program or something and they need books or something like that, that would be considered a support services typically. And then in limited cases like emergency housing, if they need a month's rent to avoid being evicted from their home that would allow them to continue participation, those things could be considered support services. You would want to, you know, kind of have a policy, a plan in place for those kinds of things, so that you're not continually, you know, providing ongoing support in the form of rent or something like that, which would be quickly deplete your program funds, but and make sure that you're applying those costs and allowing those costs according to a set policy.
The other thing that I would add to what Lynn has already said is that in these programs, obviously, the vast majority of them are short-term work experiences. So typically, you're not going to be looking at housing assistance or not always child care assistance. There might be a one-off here or there. But in most cases, what you're going to be looking at would be expenses for things like safety equipment, steel-toed shoes if they're working outside, personal protective equipment such as protective eyewear, hearing plugs, those types of things. Those are also considered support service categories because those are assigned to the individual participant. And, you know, for instance, with hearing plugs, I mean, once they're used, you're going to dispose of them after the person has left the program. So that is, that's what we typically see. So we're just going to skip ahead here. I think, Lynn, have you got, tell you what, we're going to step back. Our Deputy Commissioner, Hamza Warfa, has graciously joined us today to say a few words about the Youth at Work program and to welcome you to DEED. If you're a new
Yeah.
if you're a new agency. Commissioner.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I just want to take maybe 2 minutes from your busy 1 hour here. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, and we're excited about this program. And I think, as someone who has benefited similar programs as in my early days, as a youth, I know how impactful this program is, and so really grateful for the folks who are involved in this work. Excited about our partnership, and looking forward to working with you. And I know most of you are very familiar with some of the grant-making changes that we're embarking on. So we look to you for guidance and helping us, make sure that DEED, is serving the best, in terms of our internal processes, and you feel like, this is an authentic partnership that you have, with us. So just really wanted to stop by quickly and just say thank you and welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. And, again, he oversees all of the employment and training programs within DEED. So he is a member of the senior leadership team. So, please feel free if you have questions or concerns to reach out, and we will certainly get back to you to address those concerns as quickly as we can. Thank you, Commissioner. Before we start, one person, I am going to address a question that came in. Somebody said if a participant needs books for a training program, that would be covered under support services. Would the cost of the training program itself be covered under this category? No, that would be more under direct services, because even though you have, you may have a class where you have multiple participants, that's a direct service to those participants.
Yeah, and a direct service doesn't necessarily mean that your organization is providing the service directly, but so that's why the training program would fall under that, but the participant is getting a direct service, so, yeah. In the youth program, we lump that into direct service, and in some of the other adult programs, they have a separate category for training, but we do not for youth. And then just to speak a little bit about reimbursement. So reimbursement is the usual process of payment on DEED grants, and so that's why I'm going to address this method of payment today. Reimbursement must be requested based on actual expenditures incurred. You can't just take a $60,000 grant and divide it up, $5,000 a month for 12 months and just bill us for $5,000. You have to have documentation for the actual expenses that you incurred under the grant. The documentation for reimbursements needs to be retained by your organization and made available to DEED upon request. In most cases, once a year, DEED will be doing what we call a financial reconciliation, which will look at a particular payment request and ask you for source documentation for the expenditures that you have requested on that. So make sure that it's available and accessible to DEED upon request. You do not need to send every piece of documentation in every month when you send a reimbursement request. Requests need to align with the grant legislation. Our request for proposal, meaning, the cost categories and such that are outlined in the request for proposal, your organization's approved and executed contract, work plan, and budget, which you will be receiving once we complete that process. Our Office of Grants Management policies, DEED policies, and your own organization policies and procedures. For example, how you're going to be charging those certain administrative costs, which may be allocated across multiple programs. So those expense requests and reimbursements just need to be consistent with all those different sources, authorities.
And the one thing I would inject into this as well to add on to what Lynn is saying is that your proposals were selected based on the work plan and budgets that were presented, and obviously there have been some modifications made based on the commissioner's actions and final decisions. You have to align with those activities and with the budget as laid out in your work plan and budget, because that's how you were selected. If you don't do that, then that becomes a potential area for concern if monitoring takes place and will take place at a future point in time.
Reimbursement payment requests should be submitted every month, even if you don't have any expenditures to report. So this is basically our way of tracking where folks are in the expenditures on their grant. So if you don't have any expenditures to report in a particular month, you would just indicate that on the report, but be sure to send one in every month so that we can keep current on where you're at. You will be receiving a form specific to your agency and your grant with the contract package, the executed contract package. Very important that you use that form and all the, retain all the codes and everything that have been pre-entered on that form, because that identifies your specific grant. There must be a separation of duty in the preparation of the reimbursement request. So the person preparing the form and the person signing the form as the authorizer must be two different people. The authorizer who signs that form must have signature authority for the particular grant. And there is, in the contracting process, there is a way that a form that we have you fill out that will identify who has signature authority for your organization to submit requests for reimbursement and sign contracts and such. Okay, this is very important. When you're submitting a reimbursement request, expenditures in any cost category may not exceed what's shown as the approved budget for that category. The approved budget is entered by us based on what's approved in your work plan and budget as part of the contract. That has to remain. The only way we can change that is by doing a contract modification. It is possible to modify your contract, modify the approved budget if you realize that you need to shift costs around within the parameters of what we have in terms of staying within the 10% administrative limit, et cetera. But you need to reach out to us to let us know that you need to do that. We need to initiate a contract modification to do that. If you submit a request to DEED that exceeds what you have as your budget in a cost category, we aren't going to be able to pay that. We'll have to contact you and say, you either need to remove those excess costs from this request or submit a budget modification, or do both, depending on what your situation is. But it's important for you to keep track of where you're at with your approved budget and contact us if you need to make a change. The completed RPR reimbursement payment request needs to be submitted to a common email address, which is on the form when we send it to you. It's a common email account that people can access so that we process these requests timely. And on or before the 20th of the month for the previous month expenditures. So by May 20th, you would submit your report showing your April expenditures, for example. So that's kind of the high-level financial expectations. As I said, we'll be giving you more information with the contract materials and also follow-up, I think, webinars planned or some additional technical assistance to get into a little more details when you have the forms in front of you, when you have specific questions. If you have questions before any of these technical assistance opportunities are scheduled, please reach out to Corey and we'll get those answered for you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn. I'm going to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about the reporting requirements. For some of you that have had Youth at Work funding in previous years, this year is going to be a little bit of a departure from those past years, and we're going to get to those high-level changes. Beginning with this new biennium, all of the information on all case managed participants will be required to be entered into Workforce One, which is DEED's online case management system. I've got some additional slides down the road in this presentation today that will just give you a quick overview of Workforce One. For those of you that have programs that are going to not only serve case-managed youth, but also, for lack of a better phrase, general numbers of youth, say like a job fair type of setting. We've had those over the years. You're still going to be responsible for tracking those numbers, but we're not going to obviously require you to set up an individual account within Workforce One for each of those individuals. That obviously would not be very practical, but for those of you, and the vast majority of you have programs that are case managed, you will be required to enter those individuals into Workforce One. Local case managers and staff are going to be responsible for entering that information in a timely manner, and training will be provided to all of you at no cost. And the reason we're saying all of you is that the Youth at Work program in Workforce One is a new program for those of you that may be familiar with our systems. It's going to operate in similar fashion to some of the other standalone programs that operate. So we're going to have everybody come in. For those of you that are new to Workforce One and have never worked with it before, training is going to be provided to you at no cost. We'll have one session down here at our offices in downtown St. Paul. It will be for the new grantees, those of you that are new to Workforce One, and then we'll have a separate session for experienced Workforce One users. Narrative and quarterly progress reports, we're still going to have those like we have in the past. The narrative reports, provide important context to the data that we're going to be getting out of Workforce One. These reports are going to be due 30 days after the end of the calendar quarter. I know in the past we've had some confusion on that, but we're striving to make this a little bit more consistent compared to previous years. What we're looking for are short, concise summaries of activities that you may have done during that particular quarter, particularly anything that you may think is unique or different. It may be a certain population that you're working with, a specific location, or some type of project that you have going that you think is really neat and others would be interested in hearing about. We also we've used this for many years, what we call the success stories model, where programs feature individual participants that have excelled within the program. What we have found is that when we have to present information on these programs to either the general public or to the governor's executive team or the legislature, in some respects, in many respects, it's actually easier to explain to folks how the program functions through the eyes of an individual participant, and in addition to providing them with the overarching narrative and data that goes along with it. We also have model release forms, media release forms, I think is what they're formally titled, that the lawyers have looked at, and you will need to use those with any individual profiles that you would be sending in to us to incorporate into a success story. One question that just came in here, a couple questions on when will the Workforce One training be held? We're working on that. That's a follow-up to this. A lot of that is going to be driven by when we can get the contracts out. We're not going to do the training until we have all the contracts out to all of the grantees. Another question was, can the Workforce One training for experience be a webinar or in person? Again, we don't have a date for that. What we're going to try and do is have the Workforce One training all in the same day. So like half the day would be for new users, and part of, say, an early afternoon would be a refresher course for experienced users. We still have to work all of those details out, and the dates will be driven by when the contracts can be put in place for everybody. And Workforce One, again, this is just to recap, it's a deed system, but we partner with our colleagues over at DHS. For those of you that may be familiar with MFIP, the employment portions of MFIP are also housed within Workforce One. We have 2,000 staff working for cities, counties, nonprofits in the state that are users, and this includes state competitive grants as well. The last phase was completed in 2017, and like anything else, programs evolve and changes are made on a fairly regular basis. So again, that's something that will be incorporated into the training. The sorts of things, for those of you that are not familiar, all of your eligibility determinations and applications are going to be entered into Workforce One. The system will calculate and determine whether the participant is eligible for it or not. For instance, in Youth at Work, it's ages 14 to 24. So if you try to enter in a person who's 13 years of age at the time of enrollment, it's not going to take it. It's that sort of thing. That data is entered once per case, and then it won't be updated unless there's errors or changes, like say address down the road. Activities will be added in. We have a list of those that we've used over the years. Case noting, tracking outcomes, and then exiting those customers who completed services in a timely manner. How does DEED use the data? We use it in several different ways. Obviously, we use it to get a count of the number of participants that you have in your program, and we do compare that to what your work plan shows to see if you're meeting or exceeding your program goals. We will also take a look at activities to make sure that you have the right types of activities, at least from our perspective. You may get questions later on. If we see individuals being enrolled but there's no activities, that's obviously going to be a flag for the monitors. Are you staying in contact with customers? And again, these programs vary from location to location. Some are short-term work experiences. Others are longer-term programs that are really designed to boost the individual's skills. So we will work with you on a case-by-case basis with respect to that. Outcomes are also calculated through Workforce One. It's information that we use to provide an overview to the general public, the legislature, and other folks that are interested in how these programs function. Monitoring, this is just a quick overview of the monitoring expectations that are in state policy and state statute. For grants that are $50,000 or more, you will get an on-site visit to your location. And annual visits are required on grants for $250,000 a year or higher. And then the financial reconciliation is where the grantee's request for payment is matched up with supporting documentation. And as you can see, things like purchase orders, receipts, and payroll records. It's a short audit designed to make sure that taxpayer funds are being spent appropriately. Corey, would you add anything onto that? Okay.
I guess I would just add that the policy is over $50,000, but we do reserve the right to monitor or do financial reconciliation on a grant under $50,000 if we have concerns. So make sure you are keeping all documentation, et cetera, because that is a requirement of your contract as well for audit purposes at a later date.
And our monitors will also be looking at, if you're a new entity that has never done business with the state of Minnesota before, you can all but guarantee that you're going to have your program looked at because you're not just creating a new entity for the state of Minnesota for DEED, but also for the entire state. So if, for instance, if you get a grant, future grant down the road from another state agency, they would see that you're a vendor in the state accounting system, and they will look at those types of things. The threshold is $50,000 a year. It is an annual amount. It is not the combined amount. So if your grant is $50,000 a year, that's the threshold, or over 50,000, excuse me. So, you know, then it will apply. But again, keep in mind, if you're a new entity, you may still be subject to a closer analysis. Corey, I'm going to hand off the technical assistance to you.
Yeah, so some of you have probably received many emails from me. I'm Corey Schmid, and it's one thing we want to do with this grant is, in response to feedback we've received from multiple grantees regarding networking opportunities with other grantees. And so one way we're going to do that is start a monthly technical assistance and best practices conference call or webinar. It will probably vary depending on what topic is discussed. And we really want this to be grantee driven, so the topics that are discussed, we really don't want to be top down on this. So if there are issues any of you are having, and it seems to be for multiple organizations, that's one thing we would likely bring up in these monthly calls or webinars. And we can do that, and then best practices. So for example, if one of your organizations is maybe doing a fantastic job with engaging family members in the process, and some other organizations are having a little bit of trouble figuring out how that works, that would be a topic that we could bring up. Essentially what we're trying to do is that we want you to collaborate with each other and see what works and where we can improve and make sure we meet the needs of youth in urban and rural settings. And these calls or webinars won't start, of course, until all contracts are in place, at which I would anticipate maybe the first one, either September, October. Hopefully we can start these and just kind of do introductory pieces. So as a little friendly reminder to all of you, if you have not yet submitted revised work plans or budgets, or if you have yet to respond to the risk assessment forms that were sent out to you, please send those in as soon as possible, and so we can get rolling on that a lot quicker. And also, as was previously mentioned, following this webinar, I will send out a brief email survey to all of you that received this invite to the webinar. If you have any questions you want to ask, it'll be around, the financial responsibilities, reporting requirements, contracting, monitoring, or just any general questions. Throw those in there. We will compile those and respond to those, and we will post responses to common questions up on our website, and you can see the web link there. I will be sure to send that link out to you once we have those posted. Thank you.
Okay, I think that concludes our webinar for today. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and it will be up on, the recording will be up on the website within a day or two. Thank you, and have a great day, everybody.